Teves. And this comes after Yehuda's impassioned speech, where he explains, he goes over the whole history of the brothers coming down and him insisting that they bring Binyamin, and how he was the personal guarantor of Binyamin and he could not come back to his father without him. And after such impassioned talk, Yosef had no choice. He could not hold back any longer. And he revealed his identity. And of course, he invited his brothers to come down to Egypt, that he would feed them. And that's exactly what happens in the Parsha. They come down together with the whole family, 70 members. It enumerates those 70. And Yosef is reunited with his father. They all settle in the land of Goshen. And then we go back to the story of the famine in Egypt. So today's lesson is going to be about the concept of arvut, which means two things. It means the laws of guarantorship, which means that if you take a loan and somebody guarantees the loan, that person becomes responsible to pay back in case you default. In Hebrew, that's called an orev, a guarantor. There is also the concept of arvus, which means shared responsibility. And the same word is used for that concept. And there it means that all Jewish people are responsible for one another. The words in Hebrew is Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. Every Jew is responsible for one another. And these two concepts are related. The fact that we use the same term for the guarantor of a loan and for the mutual responsibility that Jews have for each other teaches us that those two concepts are related, as we're going to learn. So first, let's learn the verses in the Torah that talk about Yehuda's being the guarantor for Binyamin. And then we'll learn the Gemara that learns the whole concept of guarantors concerning loans from this very case. Okay, here it goes. The first is a verse in last week's Parsha, when Yehuda is giving the speech to Yaakov, explaining why he should trust him with Binyamin. And he says, Anochi e'ervenu, miyodi tivakshenu, im lo haviyosile lecha v'hitzagtiv lefanecha, v'chatasi lecha kol hayamim. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I shall stand guilty before you forever. So he makes himself the personal guarantor of Binyamin's safety. He takes Binyamin's safety upon himself. And then in this week's Parsha, and the next chapter, is when he's making the speech to Yosef, explaining why he will not allow Yosef to keep Binyamin as a slave, even though Binyamin, the goblet of Yosef was found in Binyamin's pack. He explained that it was impossible for him to do so. And in that speech, he says, I don't remember how to mute people in my computer anymore. It's been so long. How do I mute everybody? I don't know how to do this. Participants, here we are. Still no. Okay, whatever.
Rabbi, I can identify who has their microphone on, and they can just mute themselves if you want.
I can identify that too. I was just looking for the button where you could just do it to everybody at once. And that way I'm not singling anybody out. I used to know this, but I went back to my computer from my phone. Okay, I feel very old when I can't figure out these simple technology things. But anyway, so, oh, mute all. Here we are. Okay, you're about to be muted. Feel free to unmute yourself as needed. Okay, so Yehuda says, Ki avdecha orav esanar, me'im avi lemor, im lo yavienu elecha v'chatasi le'avi kol hayamim. Now your servant has pledged himself for the board to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. So pretty much that's the end of the speech, because at that point, Yosef gives up on trying to hide his identity and he comes forward. So let's move on to the Gemara in Bava Basra 173b, which touches upon the idea of arvus, of guaranteeing a loan. Let's start from Amar Rav Huna in the middle of the first line. I'm going to do some of the reading in the Talmud's text, and then we'll go over to the Hebrew, to the English, excuse me. Amar Rav Huna minan la'oriv de mishtabed, tiksiv anochi erevenu miyadi tevakshenu. Rav Huna said, from where is it derived that a guarantor becomes obligated to repay a loan he has guaranteed? Where do we get this whole concept that I can become responsible to pay back somebody else's loan just because I say so? Since when am I responsible financially to keep my word if there is no act of kinyan, of acquisition, that accompanies that word? I'll give you an example. If I say to my friend, I'm going to give you $100, and my friend comes back to me the next day and said, hey, you said you're going to give me $100. And I said, okay, that's what I said yesterday, but I changed my mind. So according to Jewish law, my friend cannot take me to court over that statement, even if there are witnesses that say that I said it, because it's called Dvorim Ba'alma. It's just words. I said I would. Okay, I said. Big deal. Now, I'm not supposed to lie. So it would not have been right of me to say it and not mean it. So that would be a lie. But let's say I said it, I meant it at that time, and now I want to change my mind. So it's not a nice thing to do to change my mind. The right thing to do is to keep my word. But that's not something that the court will force me to do. That's like a good thing. It's a good practice. And if I want to be a good person, I should do it. But it's not a financial responsibility that is enforceable in court. Especially if I make a bet where I didn't say for sure I'm going to give the money. I said it depends on something. I think the Dolphins are going to win the next game, and I'll bet you $100 they're going to win. And you happen to be a fan of the other team, whatever the other team is, and you say, no, they're going to lose. And I'll bet you $100 they're going to lose. And then they lose. That is not enforceable either, for a double reason. First of all, it's just my word, big deal. And second of all, even when I said it, I didn't really want to give you the $100 because I was expecting them to win. So I never really, in my mind, committed to giving you that money. Now, when it comes to a loan, so let's talk about Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. We're just using them as an example of three people. Ruvain is borrowing money from Shimon. And Shimon says, hey, how do I know you're going to pay me back? So Ruvain says, here, my friend Levi, he's going to be the guarantor. And Levi says, yes, I am the guarantor. So Shimon gives Ruvain the money. Now, Shimon comes to Ruvain when the loan is due, and he says, hey, pay up. And Reuven says, no, I can't. I wish I could, but my money is tied up, blah, 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 all the excuses in the world. Okay, so Shimon says, no problem. I've got Levi as the guarantor. Obviously, Levi is somebody that has money. Otherwise, Shimon wouldn't have trusted him. So he goes over to Levi and he says, hey, I got this loan. We got witnesses and everything, and you're the guarantor. So Levi says, hey, I changed my mind. I said I would pay, but no, I don't feel like it now. The halacha says he has to pay. And if it's a loan that was written down in a document, it can even be collected not just from his real estate, but from real estate that he owned at the time, even if he sold it. It places a lien on all his property. So why is it that when I say I'm going to give you $100, I don't have to? I mean, it's not enforceable in court. And especially if I wasn't sure, because I said it depends on something else, the dolphins or who knows what. So I can say, well, I didn't really mean it. So when it comes to the loan, I could say, well, I said I would pay, but I didn't really think I would have to, because I thought Reuven would pay. And now that I have to pay, I must admit I never really intended to. So I just want to back out of it. Sorry, can't back out. The Torah recognizes that a guarantor becomes obligated. So the Gemara is asking, Rav Huna is asking in the Gemara, how do we know that? And he's saying it's a verse in the Torah. The Torah says, Anochi ervenu miyodi tevakshenu. Yehuda said to his father, I am the guarantor. You can request him of me. Meaning to say, it's a valid thing. I'm saying it, and you can hold by me. And Yaakov didn't say, hey, there's no such thing. Just because you said it doesn't mean it. No. Yaakov accepted that responsibility. And when he said it to Yosef, Yosef understood that it was real. And that's how the story goes. So obviously there is such a concept. Maskif lo Rav Chizda questions Rav Huna. Ha kablonos he. Diksiv tana oisoi ayodi va'ani ashivenu. Let's look at the Hebrew, at the English, excuse me. Rav Chizda objects to this. The incident involving Benjamin is not a case of a standard guarantor, but a case of an unconditional guarantee. As it is written, deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him back to you. Okay, so we need to have some additional background. We need to understand this. There is something called an Orev, and there's something called an Orev Kablan. An Orev is a regular guarantor, and when it comes to a regular guarantor, you must first go to the borrower, and only after the borrower cannot pay, and not just that he says he cannot pay, but he actually cannot pay, he actually doesn't have the money, well, then the guarantor can be collected from, because that's what the guarantor is for. If the fellow does not go to the borrower first, the guarantor says, hey, I'm not on the hook unless the other fellow cannot pay. An Orev Kablan is something else. An Orev Kablan means you can go to the guarantor first. You don't have to go to the borrower first. You can go to whichever one you choose. In English, I think this is what a cosigner is. If somebody cosigns a loan, if I'm not mistaken, I don't really know Florida law that well, to be honest. But if I'm not mistaken, if somebody cosigns a loan, then the lender can go to either the borrower or the cosigner equally. That in Hebrew is called an orev kablan. Kablan, the word kablans means received. That means it's like he received the loan in the first place. He becomes like the borrower. Same thing. You can go to him straight away. So Rav Chisda is saying Yehuda was not a regular orev. Yehuda was an orev kablan because Yehuda said, I'm responsible immediately. There's nobody else that's responsible, and I'm gonna kind of step in his shoes if he doesn't do it. No, Yehuda said, I'm the man. I'm the one. Come straight to me. So that's not a source for the concept of a regular orev, a regular borrower, where you must go first to the lender and only afterwards to the borrower. So far, so good. This is pretty intense Talmud study. So far, so good. Very good. So therefore, Rav Chisda has another source for the concept of an orev, of a guarantor. There's a mistake in the English translation here. It says Reuven said, it should be Yehuda said. But anyway, back to the Hebrew. Elam Rab Yitzchok mehacha, lokach bigdoi ki orav zor, uvaad nochria chavlehu. Vo'omer beni, im aravta l'reyacha, takata l'zor kapecha, noikashta be'imei ficha, nilkadata be'imei ficha. Aseh zois efoi beni v'hinotzel, kivasa b'chaf reyacha, lechis rapes urahav reyacha. Imam and yesh lo biyadecha hata lepisas yad, v'im lav harbe olav reya. Okay, so Rav Yitzchok cannot come up with a verse in the Torah to support the concept of arvos, of a guarantor, but he comes up with the next best, which is from the Proverbs, the later writings, which are also part of the Torah, part of the Tanakh, written by King Solomon. Rav Yitzchak said the source is from here. Take his garment that is surety for a stranger and hold him in pledge that is surety for an alien woman. So that is what King Solomon says. You became a guarantor. Your shirt can be taken away. You didn't think it would come to that, but you should have realized. The verse advises a creditor to take the garment of debtor's guarantor as payment for the loan. And it is stated, another verse, also in the Proverbs in Mishlei, my son, if you have become surety for your neighbor, surety means like a guarantor, you've guaranteed a loan for your neighbor. If you have shaken your hands for a stranger, that means you agreed to be a guarantor and it's not even your loan. You thought you were being such a tzaddik, you're helping somebody, the poor guy needs a loan. Okay, I'm going to be the guarantor. Don't think you're going to get off so easy. Once you're the guarantor, says King Solomon, you have become ensnared by the words of your mouth. You have been caught by the words of your mouth. Now you're stuck. You can't back out of it. It's too late because the loan was given and now it's due and now you're on the hook. Do this now, my son, and save yourself. Seeing that you have come into the hand of your neighbor, go humble yourself and assemble your neighbors. Now, the end of the verse has to be understood. Well, what does it mean? Humble yourself, assemble your neighbors. I mean, if you owe money, how does humbling yourself help? And how does assembling your neighbors help? So Rabbi Yitzchok explains, this last part of the passage means, if your neighbor's money is in your possession as you owe it as a guarantor, open up the palm of your hand and repay him. The word for humble yourself in Hebrew is hitrapes. And the Gemara breaks up that word into two and understands it as an acronym for hater pas. Open up, hater is like to loosen. Open up the palm, passes the palm. Open up the palm of your hand and repay him. There's no point in delaying. You can't get out of it. If you're a guarantor, you have to pay. And if it's not money that you owe him, but rather you have become ensnared by the words of your mouth and home, an apology for a personal slight. So that's another case that King Solomon is talking about. If it's not a financial issue, if you insulted him in some and you need his forgiveness, well, then gather together many neighbors through which to seek his forgiveness. So hopefully your neighbors can intercede on your behalf and convince the fellow to forgive you. So King Solomon is basically giving advice and warning us against being a guarantor. Because when you guarantee somebody's loan, there's a strong likelihood you'll be on the hook for it. And you don't really think that usually when you put your name down there. You think you're doing the guy a favor that's not really going to hurt you. But King Solomon is saying, hey, they could take your shirt away. You may not be able to get out of this. And that's the fact. So if you're willing to do that, that's fine. But he's giving us warning in advance that is a good likelihood that it's going to happen. So we see from King Solomon that there is a concept of guarantorship that the Torah recognizes. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about this comparison, learning it from Yehuda, learning the concept of guarantorship from Yehuda, and also how it relates to mitzvahs in general. The fact that every Jew is responsible for every other Jew's performance of mitzvahs. Before we get onto that, I just want to explain what the concept is of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. So first of all, that means if you see somebody who is doing something wrong, you can't just ignore it and say, it's not my problem, mind my own business, let him do, it's his own life, and move on. No, that's not the way. You see somebody doing something wrong, you should correct him. Certainly if he doesn't know, but even if he does know, but he doesn't realize how severe the action that he's doing is and how negative it is for himself, for the Jewish community, for Hashem, for his own future. Feel the responsibility for that. If you would see your own brother doing something silly that is injurious and harmful to him and to others, you wouldn't have the attitude, it's not my problem. You would do something because he's your brother. And that's what brothers do for each other. Well, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, all Jews are responsible for one another. And you should see every Jew like your brother. And if there's something you can do to correct his ways, you should do that. This is the concept of tochacha, of giving rebuke. The reason why there is a mitzvah to give rebuke is because of this concept. We are responsible for one another, and therefore we cannot sit by quietly if somebody is doing something wrong. Now, there is a halachic ramification of this concept as well in terms of the laws of brachas, the laws of blessings. And here we are once again going to get a little bit technical and Talmudic. But before we do that, I should stop and ask if there's any questions so that we can address them before we continue. Any questions? Questions, anybody? Yes.
Can I ask you,
I think you're
please?
muted because I'm not hearing you.
No, actually,
Is it me? I'm not
just
hearing
one
you.
sec. No, it's me. Just one. Okay. I don't know how to.
Okay, now I'm hearing you. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. It is a very common practice that in many cases, parents have to sign different kind of lease or contracts for their children because of different, sometimes it's age, sometimes it's a lack of financial history. This is something that it's not a very good, I think, teaching method, but you absolutely have to do it, even if you know that your child is not very responsible. But there's no other way to sign up for a dorm or to do any type of credit or to do any purchases. What would be the right way of doing it?
Well, King Solomon is not telling you not to be a guarantor. He's just opening your eyes so you should be aware of the possible results of that. So let's put it this way. If it's somebody that you would be willing to actually give the money to, then you may as well be their guarantor because it's kind of the same. If the borrower is so close to you that you would give him the loan yourself or even a gift yourself, well, then being the guarantor is that basically. He's just saying you shouldn't think you're just going to put your name on the paper and you'll be a tzaddik and nobody's going to bother you again. No, putting your name on the paper means you pay. Now,
Well, I understand.
if it's a person that you are willing to pay for, well, go right ahead. I mean, if your child needs it, you're probably willing to pay for that child's actual loan or default because he's your child. So nothing wrong with that.
No, but it is, morally, I don't think it's a good situation where the person who is actually taking advantage, or at least, receiving benefits of the loan or any other goods that, you're guaranteed. Why does it have to be the third person? I understand the concept of paying back is perfect, but why is the order so different? Why it shouldn't be the person who took the loan would be fully responsible and only under very severe condition or very different situation than the third person, the guarantor,
That
would
is
be
exactly
responsible
correct.
for it.
That is exactly correct. In a regular guarantor situation, according to the Torah, the original borrower is fully responsible, and you can only go to the guarantor if he not just refuses to pay, but he actually does not have the money. If he says, I'm not paying because I just don't feel like it, well, then the court forces him to pay. But if he actually doesn't have the money and he can prove that he doesn't have the money, that's when they go to the guarantor. Unless the guarantor in the first place said that he is an equal guarantor, what's called an Orev Kablan, in that case, then you can go straight to him, but that's because he chose to become that.
I have not seen it in my, practice that it would be any different levels of guarantee. In my case, every time when I saw it, it happened to be just immediately the person who borrowed. Nobody ever would skip over to the guarantor, as you
Right.
explained in the situation with Yehuda.
Right. So that depends on the law, the local law, whatever it is.
And my second question is a little bit about customs or traditions or just a culture of United States of America, It's not very common, or it's not very appreciated when you get involved in something that you know for sure is not right. But most of the time, the answer would be it's not your business. So it's kind of, I'm struggling with it very, very much because I came from a completely different culture where an adult most of the time would correct mistakes that teenager or just a regular child will do, or even a parent of the at the same time. If a child is completely disruptive and destroys the whole atmosphere in a restaurant or a bus or whatever situation it is, most people around me would look at that as a very unacceptable behavior. I'm sorry to create kind of a conflict situation, but I was facing it so many times where I thought, no, it's my responsibility. I'm a teacher with so many years of experience. I know it's not right, and it's my role to say to a young parent, this is not acceptable. You shouldn't do that. It will turn back to you with twice as much harm, but the reaction is very, very different. And maybe I'm talking about, it's not necessarily Jewish and not Jewish, because you never know unless it's a person who is dressed specifically or wearing a kippah. But it's just, we had just 2 minutes of your time. We saw a really unusual situation yesterday. We were waiting for changing our driver license. It was a young woman who came with a just practically newborn child. She was definitely an Orthodox person. She is telling the policeman, she said, my appointment is on Saturday, but I cannot come on Saturday. It's a Shabbat. And he just pushed her away and said, it's not my business. Go and make another appointment. I'm not going to change anything. It was definitely a place for me to intervene and to say, what are you doing? It's just a young mother with a newborn in a carriage. How could you do that? But everybody around me would probably be very surprised or upset if I would start some kind of confrontation. I
Right.
don't know if it's the right thing to discuss or not, but it was my life experience here many, many, many times. And so
Yes,
I
definitely
eventually
a
learned to
cultural
keep
thing.
quiet.
It's definitely a cultural thing. Like in Israel, for example, everybody mixes into everybody's business. If your kid is misbehaving, all of the people nearby give you advice, criticism. They're like they consider themselves like your bubby or your aunt, or it's like one big family. But here in America, yeah, like you say, people just mind their own business. They don't like bothering other people. We were just driving down the street the other day, my wife and I, and there was a man. We couldn't tell if he was homeless or not, because even homeless people, they don't, there's certain places you lie down and certain places you don't. And here he was lying like in the corner, like in the corner of the sidewalk where you have this little thing where you go down with the strollers or with bikes. He was like lying in that with his suitcase next to him. Like, this is not normal, even for a homeless person. Like, is he okay? Is he not okay? So I'm like, do I go over to him? Is it my place? Like, but we couldn't just drive by and leave him. So we ended up calling the police, not to get him in trouble, just to make sure that he is okay, that he didn't collapse or I don't know what. But anyway, I definitely know what you are referring to, that America is very hands off and don't bother me. I won't bother you. Don't tell me what to do. I won't tell you what to do. That's definitely part of our culture. I don't know how that became that way, but yeah. Maybe we don't feel as connected to each other as within a Jewish culture, for example, where we're much more have feelings of family and closeness and responsibility. Maybe it's connected to this. I don't know. Okay. So a little bit more about Jews being responsible for one another in terms of mitzvahs. So here's an interesting application of that halacha. If I already did a mitzvah, but somebody else did not do that mitzvah, and that person, for some reason, cannot say the bracha on that mitzvah. They don't know it. They don't know how to read Hebrew or whatever it might be. So here's the halacha. Take, for example, Kiddush. I already made Kiddush on Friday night. And then a guest comes to the table. They came late, they missed it. And they are not able to make Kiddush. They don't read Hebrew. Now you could say Kiddush in English, but they're just not comfortable. They've never done it before. The halacha says that I am allowed to say Kiddush on their behalf. Now, I'm not allowed to say Kiddush twice, generally, because once you've done it, if you say it again, it's called a bracha levatala, a blessing in vain. I've already sanctified the Shabbos, so why am I sanctifying it again? Like if you make a bracha on a food or a drink, you've already made a bracha. You can't make a bracha on every sip that you take because the original bracha covers whatever you had in mind. So saying it again, it's like a wasted bracha, which is not respectful to Hashem to use his name unnecessarily. But if the other person did not hear Kiddush, I can say it again. Take another example. Somebody cannot light the Hanukkah candles. Somebody called me about this, a classmate of mine. He was trying to help a young Jew who was in prison to light the menorah. And the prison did not permit. Finally, the last night of Hanukkah, they permitted him to go and light it in the visiting area. But he had to be the one lighting it, not the inmate. So here, he is doing the lighting on behalf of the inmate. It's not his mitzvah, because this room is not his area of living, right? You have to light the menorah in your home, in your own space. So that's not his space. Unfortunately, it is the inmate's space. But my friend, who was not doing the mitzvah, was able to light and say the bracha on behalf of that inmate, because the inmate's responsibility to light the menorah, is shared with my friend. My friend is responsible to see to it that he will do the mitzvah. So he can say the bracha for the mitzvah that the other fellow is doing. For that matter, the Kiddush, I can say the Kiddush again because I'm saying it for that person. I am responsible to see to it that that person hears Kiddush. So even though I've said it already, I can say it again on their behalf. This is the concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. All Jews are mutually responsible for one another. And here is an interesting concept that I'm going to share with you. Since these two halachic principles use the same term, arvus, which is guarantorship, so we learn from one to the other. Just like when it comes to a loan, you must first go to the borrower, and only if the borrower does not have the ability to pay back, only then do you go to the guarantor. Well, the same thing applies to doing mitzvahs. In the first place, the person should do the mitzvah and say the bracha themselves. If a person knows how to make Kiddush themselves, they should. You should not make it for them if they know how to do it. Now, of course, if you're doing it for yourself also, of course you can say it on behalf of a whole group of people. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's called Beroiv Am Hadras Melech. Doing a mitzvah in a large group is more honor to the king. So there's nothing wrong with saying Kiddush on behalf of everybody present. But if you've already said Kiddush, and you're only saying it for those other people, well, then it's preferred if they do it themselves. Just like a loan is first paid back by the party himself. Only if he can't, then we go to the guarantor. So we are the guarantors of other Jews and their mitzvahs. But first, every Jew should try to do the mitzvah themselves. And only after, so to speak, if they're not able to, the guarantor steps in and does it for them. Clear? Okay. So now, here's the concept. Why is it that these two ideas are shared? Guaranteeing a loan and mutual responsibility for mitzvahs. What's the connection between them? One is a financial thing. One is a mitzvah thing. Excuse me, not so clear why these two concepts are related. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that both of these concepts stem from the same idea, which is that the word arevim comes from the word mi'uravim. Arevim means guarantor or shared responsibility, both, but it also means mixed. Kol Yisrael mi'uravin zeh bazeh. All of the Jewish people are mixed with each other. What that means is that we are one people. We are one entity. We are like one body. A body has a head, and it has a neck, shoulders, arms, hands, torso, feet, legs, toes, and every single limb fulfills its particular function, but it's also part of a larger body. And therefore, every limb pitches in to assist every other limb. When the head needs to go from point A to point B, well, the feet are happy to take it there. When the feet need to be told how to run or what to do, the head is happy to direct it. And the same thing with the arms and all of the other organs of the body. And it's not like they're doing a favor for one another. I'm such a good boy. The legs say that I'm helping the head. I mean, you're good. You and the head are one. What the head wants is what you want. And what you want is what the head wants. You are one entity. So when we say the Jewish people are responsible for one another, it's because they are mixed with one another. So if there's a Jewish person who is not fulfilling a mitzvah, or who is, God forbid, transgressing on a sin, that's not a personal matter. That's affecting only them because they are part of the body. That affects every single member of the Jewish people who are part of that larger body. Just like an infection in one limb can literally kill the entire person. My friend got a splinter in the palm of his hand. One of my friends in yeshiva, and he couldn't be bothered cutting it out, with the needle and all of that. So he just let it stay and stay and stay. And he got an infection, and they nearly had to cut his arm off, his hand off. because they said if that infection spreads, it spreads to the whole body. God forbid you could be finished. In the end, they didn't have to, but it was touch and go. So any problem of any limb is in fact the problem of all of the limbs. And that's where the concept of shared responsibility comes from. And now we're going to extend it to explain that just like we are responsible for each other's mitzvahs as a result of being part of one large family, the same can be said about financial responsibilities. Now, of course, I don't have to pay back other people's loans randomly just because they're Jewish and I'm Jewish and I'm part of their family. No, that we don't take it to that extent. But if I do give my word that I am responsible, I have the power to take on that responsibility to the extent that it becomes my responsibility. And I have to pay it back because of this concept of brotherhood. That is what gives me the power to obligate myself, even with just words. I don't have to make a kinyan. I don't have to make any signature necessarily. I don't have to shake hands. I don't have to give money. I don't have to lift anything up as a symbol of acquisition. Just my words are enough to bring about a responsibility to pay back that loan, because that borrower is really part of my family. And really his loan is kind of my loan. Now, if I don't guarantee it, then they're not going to pay me back, because then you can't have any kind of financial freedom or anything. But if I do say that I'm going to pay it back, my connection to that person is so strong that it creates a bond that affects all of my possessions. There's a lien on it. Like I said, I can't get out of it, and so on. So that's how we relate. Kol Yisrael Arevin Zelazeh. All the Jews are responsible for one another, with the concept of arvos, of guaranteeing a loan. But now we have to bring it back to Yehuda. Here goes. There's a question on Rav Huna. Rav Huna tried to learn the concept of guarantorship from Yehuda. The question is that Yehuda didn't take a loan. Yehuda said he's responsible to bring his brother back. That's not a loan. That has nothing to do with a loan. That's like a mitzvah. I'm going to do a mitzvah. I'm going to take care of my brother. If anything bad happens to him, I'm going to go all out to bring him back. If I don't do that, you can hold me accountable. Okay, but what does that have to do with a loan and a financial responsibility for guaranteeing a loan? This is not a loan. A human being can't be borrowed and paid back. Binyamin was an adult anyway. Yehuda was just doing a mitzvah, taking upon himself the responsibility of looking after his brother. That's not the same as guaranteeing a loan. So here is how it relates. The concept is that the very fact that Yehuda was able to take responsibility for his brother in a way that Yaakov could demand of him that he bring him back, how does he have that right to say you can demand him of me? What does that mean, you can demand him of me? Do your best. If you don't succeed, you don't succeed. How can you demand it of him? So the fact that Yehuda was able to take that responsibility on in a way that Yaakov could demand it means that Yehuda really felt like he was one with Binyamin. He was responsible for him because he felt he was part of him. So how can I let part of me behind? It's me. That's why Yehuda, by the way, was the one who stepped forward more so than all the other brothers. Yehuda was the forerunner of King David. who is the king over the Jewish people, and his descendants were the kings. Because the king represents, we're talking about a proper king, not a dictator. The king represents somebody who cares about all their subjects, who his whole life is about the good of his subjects, making sure that his subjects are ruled properly and are having what they need, and so on and so forth. So it's really a person who nullifies himself and gives himself completely for the sake of the greater
You're
good.
gonna take the oath to probably the- Oh, okay.
Need to mute you, sorry. So the point is, that's why Yehuda was the one who stepped forward. But that's also how we learn the concept of guaranteeing a loan from Yehuda. The fact that Yehuda was able to come forward and become responsible is because of the concept of the Jewish people being one family, one entity, and therefore responsible for each other. And that's one and the same concept as the idea of an Orev, guarantor for a loan, which, as we said, is also the very same idea of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, all Jews being responsible for each other religiously. Okay, we have a few more minutes for questions, especially since it was a pretty intense class today. Questions? Yes. Unmute yourself first, please, though.
Yeah, is this a thing about Yehuda being an Ari for Binyamin? Does this relate to how a part of Yehuda's territory went into the Beis Hamikdash, even though the most of it was in Binyamin?
That's an interesting concept. I wonder there's a connection there. The connection between Yehuda and Benjamin in the Parsha perhaps was continued with their shared ownership over the Beis Hamikdash. It is certainly noteworthy that Benjamin and Yehuda were the only two tribes that were not exiled by Sancherib when he exiled the northern kingdom. So we here today are descendants of those two tribes, as well as Levi, because Levi was also in Jerusalem, the Kohanim and whatnot. So the 10 tribes were all exiled, and Yehuda and Binyamin, who were in the south, they were the ones who were not exiled. They were the ones who went to Babylonia, came back, and here we are. So that's an interesting idea also, that connection was maintained over the centuries and millennia. But it could be that it relates also to the Beis Hamikdash's territory. I'm not sure. David, no comments from you? What's going on? David, you there? You're very quiet. No? All right. Since David is quiet, I'll wrap it up and I'll say that from this week's Parsha, we learned the concept of guarantors. The Talmud learns it from the responsibility that Yehuda took for his brother Binyamin. And this is the basis for a guarantor being responsible to pay back a loan. It all stems from the fact that we are one entity and one people, which is what enables us to be responsible for one another, both in terms of paying back loans if you accept it upon yourself, and religiously to make sure that other Jews fulfill their obligations, and even to make brachas for them as necessary. Okay, it's nice to have you all back here after the Hanukkah break. And I will be here next Wednesday with God's help, as well as the following Wednesday. The Wednesday after that, my son is getting married in Toronto, thank God. And I will instead be giving the class on Monday. I already told Rebbe Smith.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Very
you,
interesting.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shalom. Tzlachet.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. And Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Thank you.